without my insane scrawls all over it. Some of you might know what a journal club is already. If you go further on in academia, for sure, but even if you go into a research institute, into a lab for a pharmaceutical company, that kind of thing, they are likely to have these kind of journal clubs. And what it is a group of researchers will pick a paper that's kind of in their topic. They'll read it alone, and then they'll all come together to discuss it. So that's what we're going to do today. I've done this session a few times, and it only really works if you're willing to get involved. And I much prefer us to be in a kind of room where we can all sit round on the same level. This feels very odd. So I hope you guys at the back feel that you could shout out just as much as anyone else. Don't bother with your hands out. I just want to hear what you have to say about this. Because, you know, I am an amphibian biologist. I've on purpose picked a paper around birds, so it's not really my specialty either. So we're all coming at this with fresh eyes. Did everyone get a chance to read the paper? Yeah, brilliant. As I say, I've done this a few times. I've never had the same conversation twice with a group, so it'll be interesting to see which route we go down today. To start with, I always think it's interesting that we as academics hold up journal articles as the gold standard. You know, if you want bona fide, good information in academia, this is what you're looking for. And now what we're about to do is look at this and say, actually, there are a lot of problems with this paper. And any paper you read, there will be a lot of problems. So all research has limitations, and for sure the biological, squashy, whole animal type research that this is about for sure has limitations, because biology is tricky. You know, we're not doing physics where we can do hundreds of repeats and understand how these particles work. You know, we're dealing with living things that do their own thing, and so all papers you'll find have limitations. There are some things we can look at. So you're all, I suspect, in the middle of dissertation writing. Is that the case? So you can certainly look at things like the authors and the prestige of the authors. If there is a paper that absolutely nails what you want to write about in your dissertation, you can always do an author search and find out what else they've written. I don't know if you know, but often there is is it an unwritten rule? I'm trying to think if I've ever seen it written down. There's an unwritten rule about author order. Did you know this? Yeah, go for it.
And so it's the one that primarily writes the papers first. The last one is usually the person like who runs the lab or whatever.
Yeah.
And then going down is more or less their importance of like how much they contributed to the paper.
That's it, for sure. Did you all hear that? So, and this is really general, because I'm sure not all labs do this, and sometimes if everyone's put in equal amount of work, they'll just stick themselves on alphabetically. But as you say, the general rule of thumb is the first name, they probably did more of the work, and then the last name is often the person who sits over the lab, so like the professor that sits over the lab and has all these researchers working underneath them. So we can also go into, this is from Proceedings B, which is a fairly good journal from the Royal Society. Journals have a thing called impact factor, but don't worry too much about that unless you are publishing, and then you might worry a little bit more about that. So, to start off, this is where I start to squint at my notes. Would anyone be willing to give me a brief synopsis, run through of what they were asking. What were the questions they were asking in this paper? Anyone shout out what their research questions are, what they were looking for? Please, just shout it out.
The impact of vocal culture on biological fitness.
Yeah, so they were looking at vocal culture on biological fitness. And would anybody, and as I say, this only works if you're willing to get involved, would anybody be willing to talk a little bit about what they did to find that out? Thank you.
They listened to lots of birds and the birds recorded them and then checked their songs against each other to see if the song was saved.
They did, yes. So that was the vocal culture bit. Yeah, that's exactly what they did. So they did some recordings, they listened. Oh, it sounds like this one bird expert listened to the bird songs, looked at that vocal culture. What about the fitness bit? What did they do to measure the fitness?
They looked at like atypical song culture, so it was like if it wasn't a very typical sort of song production that they were looking at, that was associated with like less fitness in the birds.
Yeah.
Because it was those that were less fit were less likely to go on and find like a mate.
Yes, that's true. That's true, indeed. And so, have you spoken in your course or last course about fitness? Do we have any notion of what fitness means? Yeah. What? Do you have a definition of fitness in your that you can recall? Can you see how they've used a proxy for fitness in here? Yeah.
Is it how many offspring you can, or like how easy it is to make offspring?
That is exactly what they've done here, is they've looked at, you can look at the graphs, they have looked at how likely they were to pair, and then they've looked at offspring, as you say. Yeah, so the graphs on page 7. Yeah. There are some questions around if fitness might, be more of a population level measure. So is this truly measuring fitness? But they are measuring, as you say, the pairing and the offspring. Brilliant. So I'm now going to unpick. Unpick some things. They talk, the first sentence, cultures comprise evolved traditions that are maintained through information sharing between associates. Does anyone see any problem with that first statement when we're talking about animals? Be the problem there, or a problem there. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Whoever.
Does it imply that they do it on purpose?
It feels a little bit kind of anthropomorphized. Might not be saying that word right, but it does feel a little bit, as you say, like they're doing this on purpose. And what they're actually talking about here is the concept of social transmission. And I don't know if you looked wider into some of the papers that they cite here, but the papers they cite all talk about social transmission. And yet here we're talking about culture, which does feel a little bit, human. And in fact, so at the end of that, they've got that first reference. Now I'm struggling to read my writing. But that first reference says human and animal culture has a different definition and should be defined as it's so subjective. And yet they haven't. So they've put a sentence and then cited a paper that is actually saying something that's quite different. Which I think, whilst this is not a hanging offence in science, nobody is going to be putting these scientists' names up on Retraction Watch. It does, because there's such a pressure to publish. We all want to have a new view or a slightly sexy topic, and so talking about traditions and cultures is a good way of doing that. So, as you say, they talked about fitness. They then go on, they've got a great big figure, and can you see how much of a figure legend these figures have? I hope you will take this kind of maybe not this obsessive, but do think about this as you're writing your dissertation. We're looking for well-drafted figures, and these great big figure legends are quite useful to explain to your reader what's actually going on. Can anyone remember or quickly find how many of these birds they think are left in the wild? And what the range is? Yeah.
It's 200 to 400.
Yeah. And what's the range of these birds?
A number that I can't read because of dyslexia. I can't say it.
No, absolutely fine. Gosh, I am dyslexic as well. If I was writing anything on the board, you would hoot at my spelling.
300,000 kilometers.
Exactly, yes. So that's a big old space for not very many birds, isn't it? They then state that young male regent honeyeaters need to associate with older males other than their fathers in order to learn songs appropriate for their species and region. And then we've got a map of, mine's in black and white, which makes no sense at all. I hope you all have it. Can you see it in colour?
Yeah.
You can see it in colour. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. So it gives you a kind of map of where all these birds are and how spread out they are. The reason I am pointing you to that map is we're going to talk a little bit about the numbers involved in the study and see how much we believe their claims. The one flaw I see in this, when you were having your communication lectures, did you have any conversation about the difference between communication and signalling? I'm guessing from this kind of, oh no, I don't know what you're talking about. Something does a thing that then has a impact on another thing, and it's quite a deliberate act. Whereas signalling can be So, for example, mosquitoes use our carbon dioxide to find us. We're giving out that signal, not intentionally, to have a mosquito come and bite us. So there is a real slight difference there. And whilst these guys in this paper are talking about the male cause and the male success, what are we missing in that interaction? Yeah,
The female response.
the female response. So, whilst the males are showing adaptation and change, we have no evidence in here about what's going on with the females. And it might be because I'm a kind of born in the 1970s feminist hippie, but I think that's quite important to have the female response in here as well. There's a really good book out, I don't know if you've seen it, called Bitch, all about the lack of the female side in science. Good read if you see it. Gosh, I digress. I should stop digressing. I'm being recorded, for goodness sake. Sorry. So one of the flaws could be that we see here that they haven't taken into account the female response to the calls, and they're using the success of the male pairing to measure the female response, which there's a lot of other stuff going on there that might not be to do with, you know, how the females are responding to that call. Okay, so we have gone through the kind of introduction. At the end of the introduction, they give a little paragraph about what they did. That's quite normal in these journal articles. I don't know if you've seen. They'll give a bit of an introduction, and then the last little bit is like a rapid run-through of what's about to come. And that's quite a good writing technique as you're writing up your dissertation, to think about that at the end of your introduction, to, you know, give your reader a bit of a hint about what's coming up. They then go on to the methods. They give us a little bit of information about the study species. And then we go on to the data collection. Now, when did they collect their data? Can anyone see that? Please shout.
So from July 2015 to December 2019.
Indeed.
So over like pretty much a 4-year period.
4-year period, yeah. And when was this paper published?
In 2021.
2021. So these data are already a couple of years out of date before we're even reading them. So who knows what's moved on since then. Does anyone have a feel for kind of how old is too old for an academic journal article? You know, if you're popping it into your dissertation. Yes?
Yeah, over like 10 years, I think.
Yeah, about 10 is a good rule of thumb for sure. There are some fields, and you might be one of those fields for your dissertation, where actually it's really fast-paced, and so 10 years is too old, and 5 years might be your rule of thumb, but actually 10 years is a good thing to look at. For my doctorate, I did some work on a small frog that hadn't been studied since the 1890s, so I had to go back to the 1890s to get a reference on it, and nobody was going to tell me that was too old, because that was the last time I could see it, you know. Okay. So we've got our data collection. They then look at unique song attributes. They identify males by looking at colour bands, you know, like birds that have been ringed. Partner female, nest location, unique song attributes, lack of other males nearby. So this is how they're identifying the males. The challenge with the unique song attributes is that they're identifying these birds by that and then going on to measure that as an outcome, which might be absolutely fine for these birds, but it does make you think, well, if they're measuring it as an outcome, can you use it as an identifying factor at all? I don't know the answer to that. I don't know enough about Regent honey eaters, but if you were doing your dissertation on Regent honey eaters, that is certainly something you'd want to be exploring. And they then have this other group. So they've got their wild group, they've then got this other group, captive bred birds, either shortly after their release into the wild or in captivity. So they either released them into the wild in 2017 and then measured their song, or they recorded them in captivity in August 2019. And these data have been lumped together for one data point. What might be the problem there? Yes?
The one is from the wild, the one is from captivity.
It's not quite the same thing, is it? And it might be that there is good biological reasons why you can lump those together, but I don't think they really tell us that properly in this paper, unless one of you have seen it and I have missed it. They don't seem to properly tell us that in the paper, that there is a good reason why you can lump this all together. You know, I imagine since GCSE you've been told about the scientific method and how you have to control for everything and only change one thing. Well, in this data point we've got two things making up that data point that are slightly different. And might that be a problem? I don't know, but something to be aware of, I think. So, would anybody be willing to give me the number, the sample N? How many birds are we looking at here? So we've got 200 and 400 in the wild. How many birds are we looking at in this paper? Thank you.
228.
So we start off with a sightings database of 228, as you say, yes. And then it rapidly whoop, down to... Sorry? Yeah. So we're down to classifying the songs of 146, as you say, yes. And then we're down to... They managed to record the songs of just 47 of them. And then, so 146 out of a population of 200 to 400, that sounds, you know, in biology, especially when we're doing whole animal stuff, that's pretty good. But then you start to look at, we've then got a couple of different locations. So can anyone tell me about the numbers from the different locations?
Recordings are from captive, from captivity as opposed to wild.
So 12 captive males. And what else have we got? It might be easier if you have a look at the graphs. So we've got our two sites are the Blue Mountains and the Northern Tablelands. So how many do we have from the Blue Mountains? 14. Now, you see, this is where it all gets very confusing, because well, you can absolutely correct me if I'm wrong, please, but on the graph figure 4, they've got 88 typicals and 20 clipped. So, but then what do they say in the table here? Hold on. Yeah, you see, it's not clear, is it? That's quite bad. 20 males produced a distinctive abbreviated version. You know, this is like really fundamental stuff that in a paper you should be able to get your hands on quite easily. And this is, they're making us work for it, aren't they? So I think if you add up here, although I might be wrong, please do correct me if you think I'm wrong. We've got 88 and 20 from the Blue Mountains, and then 23 from the Northern Tablelands. But then we've got this unknown group, which I will come on to later. And I'm not quite sure we know where they came from. Do we know where they came from? Can anyone tell?
It does. It's the one that says in interspecific singing, isn't it?
The interspecifics.
Are those the ones that we're not sure where they've come from?
So we've got the interspecifics of 5, and then there's this unknown group. Do you see on this thing here? So there's like the interspecifics, 18, and then unknown, 63. So they are, and the unknowns are the ones who they didn't catch the song of, I think. So the whole premise of the paper is about the song, and they're putting in their graph a whole bunch of birds that they don't know the song of. You might think I'm being really harsh.
Sorry, I'm also confused because they've said 63, but then in their song classification they're saying 18 out of 146 failed to sing species-specific songs.
Interesting. So
So it gets worse.
Oh, what is it with these scientists and their academic gatekeeping?
say that again.
I said I can't cope with the academic gatekeeping. Who set the standard of writing papers, make it as complex as you can so no one understands what you're talking about?
Oh my God, yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Like every paper I read, I'm like, what?
You're so right, and you know what? It's really frustrating.
And as a dyslexic person as well, you're just like, double what? Like I can't even read that word.
I know.
I hate it.
And there's no need for it.
No, this is the thing that annoys me. I'm so passionate about academia not being accessible to everybody.
Yeah.
And like the COVID stuff, like that really highlighted it because we had people who wanted to get involved and know what was going on but can't read academic literature because it's so hard to understand as an average person.
Yeah, definitely.
It's so weird.
And I think, so I've been in this field for more years than I'd care to mention, and it is getting better, not fast enough, but it is slowly getting better. So maybe when we all retire, maybe we'll be there and it will be accessible, because you're right, there is no need for this jargon, there is no need for making it impossible. It's all about, I think,
They don't want everyone to be elite.
back in the day, they wanted to protect and seem superior, for sure. And
These scientists being superior over their bloody songbirds.
well, I couldn't possibly comment because I don't know Crates et al. But the thing is that as scientists, please don't look up anything I've written. As scientists, we all have to conform to this to get published. So until the kind of culture changes, we, and as a fellow dyslexic, oh my God, I'm with you, we have to play this stupid game as well. Sorry. I
We're getting sidetracked. Back to the paper.
I told you never was one of these never was one of these sessions the same as another, and that is for sure true. Where did we get to? Oh, we were talking numbers.
The maths isn't there.
Shall we move on from the numbers?
Yeah.
Let's move on. So, we've then got these historic birds. So we've got our blue table, we've got our Blue Mountain, Northern Tablelands, and then we've got our historic birds, which are recordings before 2012.
This one.
Did anyone see? There's no answer to this, but did anyone see why 2012 is a cut-off date for when? So our historic bird calls are all from 2012 and before. What happened in 2012?
It was gonna be the end of the world.
Sound biological reason right there, yeah. What do you think?
It says the male songs recorded between 1986 and 2011 were longer and had more syllables than contemporary songs.
It did. So there is something, but what happened in 2012? I mean, I don't know. I don't know the answer to this. They didn't really say why 2012 was used.
Maybe when they were said to be endangered even more, they were critically endangered. Maybe it was the distinction of that.
It could be. It could be something. You know, there was some kind of, this is where they start to become endangered. I don't think they say that in the paper. So I would want some proof as to why 2012 is a good pre-date. And the other thing, so this graph here, so figure 1, this little graph here, you do not have to understand the graph, okay? Do not panic, we do not have to understand the graph. But all you have to understand is that this is some kind of way of measuring how different the songs are from each other, yeah? And so we have the captives all the way over here, very different. Although some of the population weren't actually captive when they were recorded, if we remember. So we've got our captives over here. We've got our interspecific. That means that they're singing some other bird song. They've picked up another bird and they're singing some other bird's song. And then we've got our Northern Tablelands here, our typical Blue Mountains here, and our clipped Blue Mountains here. So these are all quite different. Our pre-2012 Blue Mountain recordings, where are they sat? Right by the sound of the Tablelands. So I had the question of what happened to the songs for the Blue Mountains to move them all the way from pre-2012 sounding like this down here. Did they? I'm not sure they explained why that had happened. I don't know if anyone saw that. Gosh, I am running out of time now. So, one of the other things I'm most worried about with this paper, if we look at these graphs here, again, don't panic, we'll go through them nice and slowly. So figure 4, okay? We don't have to understand too much about these graphs. They've done some kind of fancy modelling, it's fine. What we need to know is that the top row are about the songs. So the songs they're calling is on the x-axis, and the probability of them pairing is on the y. So if every single one of them paired up, the dot would be all the way up here. If none of them paired up, they'd be all the way down here. And the next row of graphs are about, of those successful pairings, how many of them had success. Success. Okay. So then we've got all our different chords. So we've got typical Blue Mountains, and then we've got clipped Blue Mountains, and then we've got the northern tablelands, interspecific singers, and the questionable unknown group, where they seem to have collected data on how successful they were. They've taken the fitness measures, but they don't seem to have taken a call. Is this useful data? What do we think?
No.
Feels a little bit. Feels a little bit questionable, yeah. So then we start to look. So their whole premise is that the singers that are singing other birds' songs, they've lost their culture, so they're going to be less successful than the singers that are in the right place singing their own songs. Yeah? And then we have here our northern tablelands, on the chance to pair, seem a little bit less successful than the interspecific singers. So the northern tableland birds that are singing the northern tableland songs seem a little bit less likely to pair up than the ones that are singing some other bird's songs. So is what's going on here, this is a question again I don't know the answer to, there have been a lot of questions today I don't know the answer to, is what's going on here actually they're losing their vocal culture, or is what's going on here that there are so few birds they're not bumping into one another enough? Is there something else going on here? Because when you've got the Blue Mountain callers, they seem to be much more successful. And actually, when you look at nesting success, so once they've paired, actually, our 5 interspecific singers are all up there doing brilliantly. And what really is the measure of success, I suppose? Having successful offspring. Whereas our clipped Blue Mountains, they're not doing well at all. What's going on there? Is there something else? Is there something environmental? Is there? Yeah.
I mean, I was going to say that, like, from reading through the paper, they suggest, they provide saying that rare evidence, but there's very little backing to what they're trying to say. It's almost like they're saying, oh, look, this is a really shiny new product, and ask us where we sourced our information, because we don't know that either.
I love that you've picked up on the language they're using, because they do that so often. So they will use hedging language, or as you say, the word rare. They'll say, it is likely that. Or they will put in just the mean without putting in the standard deviation, so you have no idea of the range. Or, but the language that they use. And in fact, that brings me beautifully onto the next point. So, I don't know if you've ever done an article critique before.
Yeah.
Yeah? So an article critique is usually you very briefly summarise the paper, what went on, what they found, and then you move on to critique, what we just did here. Although we only did half of the critiquing, we did the finding all the bad bits. It's much more appropriate to do both, so find the good bits as well. Which there are good bits of this paper. So, we went through the bad bits today. So you then critique, and I want to show you. Now, those of you that already know me probably know this one already. Hopefully, if you're writing up a dissertation, it has these bits of work across the top. So, if you are at the moment describing the method you've used, this could be useful for you. And it gives you like little words and phrases to help. That can be quite useful. So these are the bits of work across the top. Maybe you're battling with the dreaded introduction. And so here it tells you a little bit about the introduction and then a bit about, you know, why is the topic you're studying in your dissertation important. But what I want you to have a think about for, if we were going to write an article critique of this, there are, as well as the bits of work across the top, there are language functions down the side, and being critical is one of them. And I quite like this. I use this myself, because when you write a lot, you find yourself using the same words again and again, and actually I find this so useful. So if you were to identify weaknesses in this, they fail to fully define why 2012 was used at the cut-off point. They make no attempt to assess. And you see how you're never writing explicitly, this paper is bad because, but you're using like judgy language, like fails, offers no explanation. So from the language you're using, you're saying, I've read this paper, and this is what they did in it, and this is what I think about that. And whilst you know, this is, we've done a lot of the negative, there are you know, was this influential because actually the you know, government took note and realised we really need to do something about these poor songbirds? Was it innovative because nobody's done anything with wild songbirds before? So it doesn't all have to be negative. So if you were going to write an article critique of this, you could use some of these bits of language. So you could write your little summary of the article and then use the judgmental language to get your critique together. Okay. Does that all make sense? Great. If anything doesn't make sense, or if you want to talk over anything that we've discussed today, or anything in general, just drop me an email. I'm s.hopkins@surrey. Really happy to chat. Well, this is the extent of my knowledge on songbirds, but really happy to chat about other stuff too. Critical writing, that kind of thing, really happy to talk about that. The register, has everybody been ticked off?
Do
you want me to-
the names that I don't have written down?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so we have Amanda Clark. No. Lexi. There's no other Lexi. No? No. Eve. Nope. Arzu.
She's messaged me, she's not, she was